Now, one of the keys to working efficiently in Moto is to understand a concept called rigging. Now, if you haven't bought Rich Hurry's Rigging Master Course from Luxology, you definitely need to go do that because it is incredibly informative. And if you think rigging is all about animation, you are dead wrong. Rigging is going to make our lives easier for product photography and virtually anything else you may want to be doing in Moto. If you understand how rigging works, you understand how to work with items in space in Moto. And that is a really, critical thing to understand if you want to do anything at all. So go ahead and buy that course. But we are going to cover some basic rigging techniques here, specifically pertaining to our product photography workflow. Now, the first one we're going to do is based on a problem. So in this video, let's outline the problem and basically talk about setting up the most basic kind of rig that we would use for that. And then in the next video, we'll look at using that and then maybe even look at a less desirable alternative for the sake of demonstration. Okay, so let's first outline our problem. I'm going to create this ramp here, instantiate a ramp from our new presets. I'm going to create a new sphere as well. I'm going to go into my camera view, select that sphere, hit Shift-A to zoom fit. I'll head to my poly selection mode just so things aren't highlighting on us in funny ways. And let's talk about what the problem is, okay? The problem is when we're working with product photography, you're going to want different angled shots, right? You're going to want one low one like this, and you're going to want a straight on front view, and you're going to want a kind of a side view like this, and whoa, that's an issue, right? You got this, here's the edge of our ramp back there. And over here, we're going to see nothing but black. And even if you made this ramp extend really far around, well, it's going to get dark over there. You know, there's going to be shadows. It's just going to look weird. If we rotate to the other side, we're going to get the same problem. Well, there are several solutions possible for this, right? We could just work like we would in the real world, where we put our camera on a tripod and we rotate it up and down. But if we want to rotate the product, then we would rotate the product, right? Instead of moving the camera to one side or the other. That's a perfectly good strategy. But in Moto, we don't have to do that. And we're going to look at a slightly, I think a better alternative in some cases. And that is to actually set up our ramp. We want this ramp item to follow our camera so that when we rotate around to the side, the ramp will face us so that it never disappears. It's always right in front of us. All right, so that's the problem. That's the solution that we're going for. Now let's look at some rigging. Okay, so to do a proper rig, what we want to do is abstract the problem. Okay, now that sounds really weird. We're going to talk more about what that means. Let's do it, and then we'll talk about the context after we've done it. We'll go to our Setup tab here, and I've actually just closed up that scene I'd created a completely blank scene. Now I'm in my Setup tab, and the Setup tab is new to 6.01, incredibly powerful, lots of new stuff. Up here in the top left, we can create a locator item. Now a locator item in Moto is very much like a null object in After Effects, if you're familiar with that. It's a blank node in Maya. It's just it's a vector, it's a position in space that we can use to locate other objects. And this is the key to abstracting our rig from other items in our scene so we can reuse it over and over. Now let's rename this locator turntable. Head down to the display properties. And I'm going to set the pivot to no and the center to no. That way we're not going to see that pivot in the center of our object when it's selected. And under size, let's set that to 0.1. Because actually locators are rather large by default, usually 1 meter high, which is kind of problematic sometimes. So this is a much more manageable size. We'll take this turntable, right-click it, and duplicate. So we have another one, and we'll call this our target. Okay? So we have a turntable and a target. Let's take that target and move it. W for move, and I'm just going to drag it up in space. So it's up over there. Now, what we want to do is we want for this turntable to follow the target. Okay, we want it to always point at the target. So we'll select the turntable first, the thing that we want to aim. Then we'll select the target second, holding the Shift key, in that order. Head over here to the commands and click on Direction Constraint. You can see it's drawing a little blue line for us now, showing us the direction constraint is in effect, and also our object down here is pointing. The z-axis is pointing directly at our target. If I select the target and move it around, then you're going to see that the other locator, the turntable locator, always points directly at it, which is pretty good. That's not bad. Good start. However, it's not perfect, right? Right now, this y-axis is going to not point straight vertical, right? If I move this up and down, we're rotating on the x-axis as well. And we definitely don't want that. You can imagine that if this is our ramp, we don't want the ramp to tilt up to point at the camera. We just want it to rotate on the y-axis. So, let's expand that turntable, and you'll see the constraint that we just added to it, the direction constraint. Let's look at the properties for that direction constraint. And at the bottom, you're going to see Add Output Options. Okay, we'll click on that. And now we have what's called a matrix channel effect modifier, where we can set the opacity for each of these things. Let's set the opacity for the X rotation to 0, and the Z as well. So now we're only rotating on the Y-axis. And now our turntable is oriented correctly, right? The Y-axis is pointing straight up. And even if I pull this target locator up and down, that's not going to change. But if I rotate it, the Z-axis is always going to point the correct direction. This is perfect. Exactly what we wanted. So, we now have a rig that we can use to position things in space.